science project-based. That I'm doing very similar to that one today. Next week or the week after, just confirm with Chris. I'll be doing one that's specific to what we've been doing with the COVID shutdown for the last 2 months, May and June. That one's still in the process of just getting finalized, so we'll hopefully get that onto the schedule here over the next 2 weeks as well. So I'll share my screen here and we'll get started. A second here. I'm looking at the wrong screen. There we go. So I teach grades 6 to 8 in a middle school in Lethbridge. It's a brand new facility in our city that houses about 800 kids. My principal has tried to do a couple of different things over the last 2 years, and we decided to go with project-based and concept-based learning for science and social studies, partly because I have a little bit of experience with that. So I'm going to share you a bit about what I've been doing in the past 2 years with my science. Some of the projects I've been doing for over 10 years, just in different schools. So hopefully you'll find these useful and helpful in the future. Here's my email, which Chris, I'm sure, is publicized as well. We'll start off right off the bat with just the basic graphic here of project-based learning, where concept-based learning comes out of. The only thing I'm really going to point out here is this final presentation piece. We have buy-in in our students because of this last piece to this puzzle. Kids are expected to learn how to become presenters. We give them, part of our instruction is on how to produce quality PowerPoints, how to talk to your audience, how to look for feedback with body language, that kind of stuff. And if you present that as that they are working on this project to present to somebody at the end, and not necessarily to me, because in middle school, I'm no longer the celebrity. Elementary school teachers have that benefit. So what I try to do is I bring in experts in the field or people that are much higher than me in our school division or community members, where the people, the students know they have to present at a quality that's at a relatively professional level. And then the second thing I ask them to do is present to their peers with that same professional manner. And when they do that, it's surprising how quickly their quality of their presentations increase. So that if you are looking at project-based learning or not familiar with it, if you take a look online, you'll find some great examples. I do another presentation on this, but that's all I'm going to talk about it today with the steps involved. I'll show you what I do for actual projects. When you talk about the different cogs in project-based learning, all of these pieces are in place at a different level, depending on what project you're doing. So when I pitched this to my principal 2 years ago, I said, there's a way to learn that's beyond the curriculum. So if this is the science curriculum for this school year or next school year, the red line represents curriculum of the knowledge and skill the kids would learn. The red filled in space would be the success of the achievement of that student if they completed a successful year. I said, well, that's great, but I think in science and social studies, we've got a curriculum that tends to bring kids to personal interests that they will expand beyond, and that becomes then this triangle. This triangle is really important to a kid's learning. It's tough to assess because there's knowledge learned beyond the content, skills learned beyond the content, and then new areas of potential interest. And for 30 different kids, you'll have 30 different triangles. But that's a great way to make the projects work well. It's very hard for me to come up with a project that will entice all 30 kids, but if you give them enough ownership, they buy in, and you are there as a facilitator. So those triangles begin to represent a whole different shape and color, depending on where the kids go with that. And the principal that I worked with thought, well, that's a great idea. You know, you can start overlapping these triangles in different subjects, for example, is what I just did with the green one. But I said, where we're going to find the biggest results is over 3 years. So if we take the science curriculum over the next 3 years in our school, the curriculum that the kids are going to learn, that's what a screen would look like. Parents would be more than happy to see this achievement. But if we represent them with project-based learning, you start to see these multiple triangles appear. Kids going in different directions, expanding into different curriculums. and you are there to facilitate. You're still providing all the outcomes and all the content that they should be covering in science, but they're now developing into the social studies curriculum, crossing that over, using their math or language arts. Language arts teachers in my school ask me, how do I get my kids to write essays in language arts about science stuff? And I said, well, that's just where their interests lie. So it's worked out really well in our school. I teach both science and social studies, which is a rare combination, I think, for most people. But I find those two are the most beneficial to the project-based learning. So let's start with grade 6. It's tough to ask, but I'm assuming there are some grade 6 teachers out there. If not, this ties really well into the grade 9 curriculum as well. This crime scene dioramas are common around the province from what I can tell. What we do with them is I cross them into, especially in grade 6, into the social studies curriculum. So for example, I've got a city map that I present to students like this. I ask them, okay, here's a particular venue, piece of property that you guys will be purchasing these lots. These lots are in a semi-recreational area with a river running through it, lots of green spaces. When they do this, they have to actually purchase it. We give them some money. They get to understand the value of taxation, that type of thing. And so it blends really nice in the social studies. But on the science piece of it, you start talking about the ecosystem that could be in this particular area and how the grade 6 science with trees and forests, or the freshwater systems when we get into grade 8. So they have some value here. So what I asked them to do is, once they purchase their property, I tied into the grade 6 civic responsibility project in grade 6 social studies, and they come up with their homes. So I asked them to build their house that will fit into a map that looks just like that. This map takes up 4 tables and a common space just outside my classroom, and they actually place their homes on that space. So with that, you've created a community, and within that community, people are starting to know their neighbors. They impact their neighbors by planting trees. We had a civil court case this past fall with one student taking their neighbor to court because the tree that they planted was oversized and shading the solar panels of the house next door. So it ties really well into the social studies. But with the grade 6 science, they have to go through and work with the environment and understand the civic responsibility of how they're going to build their homes, where they're going to place their homes, how solar and things like that will impact it, where water lines will run, how they're going to deal with trees and forests, the natural ecosystems that they work with. So I every day, we go through that bit. And then when I start the evidence and investigation unit, I began to cause crimes in the city. So I'll go anywhere from breaking windows in some of the kids' homes. I burned down a couple of homes. So the next morning when kids come in, their home is gone. I've had a couple of tears, but it's all part of life, right? So with that, usually I don't burn their house. I'll take their house off, but the charred remains looks like what their house might be. So they have to come up with the crimes. I'll leave little footsteps, or we'll leave pieces of hair, fabric, flat tires, depending on what kind of crime scene you want to set up within your science. It's all about observation. The first thing they do is they come into the classroom space or common space, and they look to see if they can see a crime. It makes for the investigation piece really good. Diverse every day. I take fingerprints of every kid in my class and photocopy them. So they have in their investigator's pamphlet, there's the 30 pairs of fingerprints. And what I'll do is I will reduce them in size and place them some places around on the different houses or their vehicles. And within that, you've got this whole city arrangement of what your city would look like. So if you go back to the original map, it's a pretty simple map. It's a little bit of white paper and some paint, felt markers. You can have the kids actually create it if you have that time. But with the allotment there in your class spaces or class size between 25 and 35, everyone has a piece of property that they have to maintain and consider what they do for waste and recycling, I give more points or assessment pieces when we take a look at what kind of products they built their houses with. So it's well beyond the crimes and investigation of grade 6. But my hope is that it flows into the upper grades, 7, 8, and 9, and ties well into the science curriculum that they'll get at those levels. So this would be an example of a rubric for that particular crime scene diorama. We, instead of giving percentages in my school, we give a rubric that gives a bit of a number value. So you can see across the top there, number 5 would be the inspector all the way down to the sergeant. And the students don't feel there's a failure here. We've communicated with parents and students to explain our rubrics to them. Just because you're a sergeant doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't do a good job. It's just your background and your ability to communicate or share your information is still at a beginner level. And the hopes is that by the end of the unit, you're up around, commander or even hitting the inspector piece. So that rubric is shared at the start of the unit. And we use this very similar rubric all the way through at our school, depending on what the topic is in science. I mean, obviously the inspector and sergeant change, but we use a number system, or sometimes it's just a word of meeting expectations, exceeding, or training, we call it, that kind of thing. It allows for me to give a bit more formative feedback and a whole lot more discussion with my parents and students than just an 85 on a report card. So grade 7, and I think this will work, we do structures, and I like to start out the structures one because structures can take off its own beast. It's massive. But I always want the students to think about why are we building certain things, or why are certain things built the way they are. So I'm going to show you this quick video. I think it should come through no problem. Hopefully it sounds not too loud. So as you can tell, living in southern Alberta, this is a common occurrence. We have these big bins, and a lot of kids have to deal with this every day. Not necessarily as severely as that young man did. But the idea behind our very first project in this is that the city of Lethbridge has contacted my students, and they want us to do something with these 10,000 bins that are causing problems because they're blowing down the streets. So what I do with my students then is I break them into teams. And their first assignment within this project is come up with a collective idea to how to improve the garbage bins in our city. So I assign them into color teams. You can tell by the duotangs. They come up with ideas. They do some online researching of other cities and where they go with and what they've done with them and what the purpose of the bin is to begin with. Once they've got to that part and they start to work as a team, the rest of the whole structure unit becomes really simple. Kids are working with kids that they don't normally work with, but there's a common goal, and it's not so complicated that just the elite kids and the more advanced kids are doing all the work. So these are some of the second projects they do then. They have to come up with a famous structure that you would find somewhere around the world and be able to present the qualities of these different spaces. And you can tell some kids do some excessive amount of work on it. The Taj Mahal there, the kids know well ahead of time that I give no assessment on what their project looks like. It's all on the content that they present after the fact. But the kids buy into it so quickly. The Great Wall of China there on the right-hand side, kids will spend hours on this, and the parents actually engage with them more too, because the kids start to explain why they're using materials they're using. So they're actually working on their presentation well ahead of planning for it, because they're sharing their ideas with their parents or their peers. So this would be the assignment, famous instruction of a famous structure around the world. We're looking for the ability to tell us the function, classify, what type of structure it was, the aesthetics, the materials, the cost, the safety factors that are in there, which is all part of the grade 7 curriculum. The marking rubric, which is a little bit cut off, but I'll add that to the end of product here if you download it. But we've had everything from, you can tell the lighthouse in Nova Scotia to the Great Wall of China. So I'm just going to show you what the kids do afterwards. Once they've done their project, they have to present to the class, kind of in a mini conference about their structure. So this is one of the students that it's about average for what I get in my class. They'll talk about the location. They'll talk about what the materials are out of, the shape, the form, those types of things. They'll include blueprints if they can find them, the cost, those types of things. And then the expectation is that they come up with some kind of representation within a diorama or a drawing or a picture or something like that. So this one was quite difficult for the student to reproduce with clay or anything that they tried. So they ended up doing just a fortnight image of the Sydney Opera House. And it was pretty, I'm sure the kids spent way too much time on it, but it helped them understand maybe and remember a bit more about the concepts we were trying to get across. This one was a second example. Again, this was about average. The Lotus Temple was done by these two students, and that's the structure they built out of cardboard from scratch. So this isn't a model. They cut all the pieces. They did all that. Again, I didn't ask them to spend time on it, but they used it as their presentation tool, and they were able then to show all the different parts of the curriculum. So that was, it's an exciting unit for my kids. They get to do a bunch of things with structures. After they do that, we get back to, okay, you are now an architect and you need to construct something that's going to be useful. And because we don't have a lot of resources in the sense of money or shop availability, that kind of thing, is I have taken a bunch of boxes that I got from my library. I have over 60 boxes sitting in the back corner of my room, and we use them to build different structures. And often it's a challenge or a competition where they are running around trying to beat the clock to reproduce different images. I'll put it up on the smart board, and their job is to reproduce it as best they can and figure out, okay, we got to get from point A to point B. How are you going to do that with boxes, knowing there's set size to it? This is a quick video. As I talk, I'll let it play. See if I can I'll turn the volume down. I asked them to come up with an igloo that they can fit into. They have 2 minutes to do it. Oops, sorry, I'll try that again. They have 2 minutes to get it done. And I pull out the school drone and we film it, and kids think it's kind of cool to get a drone picture from above, and we put it in fast motion. I'll just jump ahead here. And at the very end, if they can't fit in it, that's a failure, or not considered a failure as in a mark, but a failure in producing the product. They didn't meet the stipulation of the size. And the biggest thing that they enjoy at the very end is to break it apart. But I don't think this group actually did. So, but that's as simple as getting a bunch of boxes. My caretaker knows where to bring junk in my school. We use a lot of recycled stuff in my classes where kids are using old bags for different things, the cardboard, plastics, those types of things, styrofoam. We use it for everything in my class, and kids don't have to then bring their own materials in very often. Gradate. An example that I use is we do the freshwater and saltwater unit. This project I stumbled upon, and honestly, it was a complete stumble. We were approached by the agricultural group in Southern Alberta with some money that they were granted by the government. They said, we have $1,000 for you guys. What would you like to do with it? It took them a while to get us the money. So they said, well, we need you to do this before the end of the year, which was now December, I think, 7th. And we said, okay, let's go on a field trip. And part of the field trip came from the fact that the students that we had on our classes, we had 100 grade 8 students, we asked, how many of you had actually touched the Old Man River in Lethbridge, Alberta? And we only had, I believe it was 4 students that actually did some sort of recreation within the city limits in the river. So we thought, well, let's do that. So we went down to the Old Man River, which is down in the River Valley in Lethbridge. There aren't any homes down there. It's all recreational space. The river's usually really low flowing, so it's not something you can swim in necessarily. But we went down, touched the water in the middle of December. It was quite cold outside, -12, and we told the kids, okay, we're going to find out where water comes from. We hopped on buses, 4 buses, and we went to where our water supply comes from. We stopped in Fort Macleod, which is about a half-hour drive, or about 4 hours, 8 hours good flow on the river. Uh, and we talked to the waste management people there, and they talked about what they do for when they flood, and what they do with the raw sewage. So as soon as you tell grade 8 students that the water they drink comes from a potential waste management plant that has to allow raw sewage into the river when they flood, you've got them. And we had no idea the impact of these kids and what that piece of information was going to do for the rest of the day. We went a little bit farther up the river. We stopped at this this farm right here, which is an organic garlic farm. And you can see the river flowing past it there. This particular river flooded in 2005, where the water was about 12 feet above where the buses were. So talking to the people that own this space, they bought it 6 months after, 6 months before the flood. And the stories they told about the destruction and erosion and the impact that water had on their lives was about a 45-minute talk of, again, grade 8 students. And they were locked in. The owners were quite emotional about it. So that impact of what water can do, the erosion factor, the need for irrigation in southern Alberta, those types of things. So again, that was more information the kids brought in. We didn't ask them to write anything down. There were no questions. They asked questions. They didn't have to fill in anything. So it was just, we were shooting in the dark on this one. We got to a point where we stopped along the river a few times, started looking at habitats where animals would be down the river valley. We stopped at the Old Man River Dam and talked about how they deal with floodwater and the importance of having irrigation water in southern Alberta, the ability to generate power and the lack of use of generating power with it in southern Alberta. So they're getting some more background information and some experience. And then our last stop was stopping at an old crotchety teacher's farm. And this guy, he calls himself crotchety. His name's Lloyd Price. He retired about 6 years ago. He owns a piece of property here on the eastern slopes of the Old Man River, eastern slopes of the Rockies, and he raises cattle. So he started to talk to kids about the importance of water to him and being at the start of the Old Man River. So you can see off of his hip there, he's got a tin cup like any good farmer cowboy would have. And he asked kids, okay, who would like a glass of water? And he bent over and dipped it into the water here that was feeding his troughs for the cows. And the kids went ballistic. They couldn't believe that he was drinking cow water. And like a good old farmer, he played it up really good. And he asked if anybody would want it, and nobody did. And finally, he picked out the kid that was probably the biggest struggle for the day. It's amazing how older teachers can do that. And finally got him to try the water. And what was perfect about it is the kid tried the water. He grimaced immediately, and the kids thought he was poisoned. But what had happened is the kid felt the heat of the water. And it was -12 outside, but it was coming and being fed from a natural spring from the eastern slopes there, which we called the start of our water. So as soon as kids realized what was all about, they felt from this cow water is now like gold. This is the water that eventually gets to them a couple days downriver. And this is what we, our livelihoods in southern Alberta rely on, is this bit of water. So we basically did all of the fresh water unit, which takes about 5 weeks, 6 weeks to do, in one day. And as we were riding back on the bus, we said, okay, here's the project the kids are going to work on. We gave them a handout, and we figured, okay, they'll answer all these questions. Within the first 3 days of that assignment, they were done. And we thought, what are we going to do for the next 4.5 weeks? And so we put it back on the kids, which to our surprise, they wanted. And we had 23 different projects started, everything from wastewater management to irrigation to flood control to the importance of fresh water to agriculture. So within that, we had to create a project around it. And that's where I found the project-based learning approach. And we adapted that a little bit to fit into our program. And the kids came up with these projects, but their biggest ask was that they got to present this to somebody. So our kids presented to different groups that dealt with water management, political people that had some say or sway in what they do with floodwater. We talked to cows and fish. We talked to irrigation, the irrigation groups down in Southern Alberta. But these grade 8 kids really had come up with a brand new project for us that I try to replicate every year that I teach grade 8 science now. To be able to follow the water up to the Old Man River or up to the eastern slopes isn't always available because it's a big cost. But anybody that lives in a town or city, you've got some access to a water source there, whether it's a lake or a river. And giving the kids the opportunity to actually experience that and have people come in and talk about it that actually rely on water has made this project probably the most successful and the longest lasting one that I've done so far. For those of you that are teaching grade 7, expansion and contraction, I'm going to show you a couple of quick videos here. What I used here were red solo cups, and elastic bands, and twine. And for expansion and for contraction, I just used some equipment from the phys ed room. Let's see if the videos will work for me here. Make sure the volume's not up. So the goal here is to use expansion and contraction of the elastic band to move this cup to another point and stack another one on top of it. So working as a team, the kids have to figure out how they're going to move this using expansion contraction of both the rubber from the elastic band to the material of the string. Is that expanding, contracting, and the plastic itself? And the kids love it, but they understand the difference of expansion and contraction. Then here's the contraction piece. And what their goal here is to move this the ball, through kind of an obstacle course where one kid has to sit down and stand up. And all they're doing is moving this ball, contracting and compressing. And they get a pretty good understanding of what expansion and contraction are then. So with this particular project, once they're done, they've got to come up with similarities or something similar to illustrate what expansion and contraction are in a game format. Energy and matter in grade 7, we talk about solar panels and renewable energies, those types of things. And I start this unit off with this particular graph about the waves of innovation. Some of you may have seen this before. It talks about all the major innovations that have happened over a number of waves in the last 250 years. Well, if you're teaching social studies, that is what the grade 7 social studies is about too, this time period. So if you can tie your science and social studies together, or if you're working with a dyad partner or in a quad where the science teacher has the ability to work with the social studies teacher, you can see how these science fit in with the history of the world, and particularly the creation of the country of Canada. So when we go through these, the kids see, oh yeah, I understand what this all is. They see where their cell phones, where their computers fit in, where industrial changes have happened, where they started to talk about renewable resources. And then I tell them, well, we're hitting a 7th wave. You guys are the cusp of the seventh wave here. And you don't realize it, but you're the most important capital to all of these waves continually moving forward. And if you ask any economist or futurist, they are talking about human capital. So if you sell the kids that they are part of the waves of innovation, that gives them the permission to go out and try and fail on the different projects that they try. And the idea of fail is not a bad word in my classroom, because that's the way we learn, right? The idea of the Edison, the light bulb, the telephone, all those types of things. You have to fail in order to succeed. So I show them some other images like this particular one. And if you were out there interacting with me, I'd ask you what you thought this one is. And since none of you are really ready to answer, I'm just going to tell you, it's a windmill. These are inflatable windmills that are being in testing. A Canadian company is part of the development of this. these particular windmills will generate up to about the same amount of energy as 5 permanent standing windmills in a very short period of time. They can be taken up and brought down so that they're not obstructing views, migration periods, that kind of thing. They won't impact as many birds, bats, those types of things. So the idea of this being an innovation and trying something different and testing and failing continually, it fits really well into the grade 6 science curriculum with aerodynamics and flight, when they're developing their parachutes or the airplanes, the gliders, the paper airplanes, just giving them some examples that are obscure and unusual. This particular solar farm is down in Nevada. They talk about solar panels, and you have to explain this isn't a solar panel, it's a mirror, and it's the heating of the tube here. They have oil that runs through this, and it heats up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, which then generates steam, which then creates power for 10,000 homes in Nevada. So giving them a chance to see a bunch of different things that they've never experienced before. It's tough to be creative unless they've had some experience. So giving them some experience with some innovative thought and projects is really important. Here in Southern Alberta, we talk about the importance of the temperature change and climate change and what will happen over the next potentially 50 years with the change in temperature, and showing them diagrams of this being the dry, almost desert-like space, and what will happen if climate change continues, where water becomes more and more important. I try never to talk, maybe down is not the right word, but I always want them to think, okay, I trust what you think, and that helps with their confidence in creating their projects. I expect your projects to fail the first time and the second time, the third time. And that always helps with the confidence. Kids don't get discouraged really quickly if their projects don't work well. So I use this particular diagram as, see, we are suggesting things are going to get worse. How can we try to make them better? And that's why we need to keep trying and practicing and failing. After that, we go and try to connect with a bunch of different schools. I teach middle school, and you can tell the kids here are not middle school kids. These are high school and university students that my middle school kids will connect with. We have a climate change symposium. We try to do it every year, where a group of my kids get a chance to talk with older kids, and they have to come up with ideas on how to improve energy efficiency in Southern Alberta. We worked hand in hand with Inside Education. For those of you that have ever used Inside Education, they're a great PD source, and they will come and facilitate this for you if you need some help with an event like this. We had 150 kids. Like I said, we had some First Nation. We had a First Nation school come in and join us from the one local reserve, and just the kids being able to talk with other kids beyond the classroom, where a teacher is not the main focus here, allows them to become innovative with the projects as well. At the end of this symposium, we took the kids out to a windmill and actually allowed them to get up inside one, which that was just a quick call to the local energy guys here. They were more than happy to show us the inside of the bottom of the windmill. But they showed us where the energy collection is and transformations are. Again, that all has to do with the experience. And the last one I'm going to share with you this afternoon is for grade 9. This particular grade 9 one I've been doing for about 15 years when I do get a chance to teach grade 9. This is about recreational development and environmental conservation. What we did is we took an old story that happened in Southern Alberta a few years ago, where a group of people were going to take the Crow's Nest Mountain, or Crow's Nest Lake, and convert it into a BAMF. So this was the proposed site, which was along the old Crow's Nest Lake. And what they were going to do was going to produce a multi-hotel and tourist site that would allow people to come and enjoy this lake. It was supposed to make millions of dollars, lots of job opportunities. So what I did is I presented this to my class, saying, okay, this is the space. If you remember, some of the other opportunities that we worked with in water in Gradate. This is an important piece of property here in Southern Alberta. It's important to a bunch of different groups, and I divided the class into four. One was the developers of this site. One was the environmental groups that might be concerned about it. One was the community groups that might be a part of using this space, and the political decision makers of the region. And the last one had to do with some of the unemployed people in the area. So each group had to go out and do some background research on their particular opinion about this site. And the amount of kids that actually got on the phone and they started emailing and looking online and finding out about this site was surprising again. But one of the phone calls got CBC somehow. CBC called my classroom or my principal and asked if they could come in and do a story about this. At the time when they were actually developing this, they came in and filmed a debate that we had. And just by chance, after that, 6 days later, the particular developers of this site vanished, and they went AWOL and stole the money, and the project disbanded. But what did happen from it was we had political people from that region and other interested people that contact us, say, can you tell us where you got the information, the background research on some of the stuff you talked about in your debate? Which was shocking to me, because the internet is out there, people could find the information. But they gave a lot more meaning to my students, and all of a sudden that project then extended into, okay, we're going to forget about Crowsnest Lake, let's talk about another space, and we're going to develop that, or take the opinions that we had from the Crowsnest Pass, and developers, now you're going to develop this piece of property. And they went about coming up with a plan like this. The environmentalists did the background research on it, and then they all shared their information. So my job was limited in this, and that I was there as a facilitator and answered questions occasionally, corrected a few things here and there. But the amount of notes were minimal. The amount of actual me and doing the instruction was minimal. And the kids did fantastic on PAT that year. So it was just a nice reinforcement that we weren't doing it wrong. Whether we were doing better, I don't know, but we weren't doing it wrong. So I used that same map in grade 9 again, where they go, and this is that development land, and they go and create that new tourist site. So I will open it up to questions or other ideas from other people. I just wanted to throw Inside Education on there. If you've never heard of this group, it's worth a look. They provide free PD for teachers. That means your travel, your accommodation, your sub costs, pretty much anything that you would have to put money out for, they do it all for you. Check out their website. They usually go on 3 different PD site trips a year. Some are up north, some are into the forest, some are into the grasslands. I've been on 4 of them, and the best PD ever, because you meet people from across the province, and you get to see, just like I did with my students, a bunch of different, or have different experiences that you can pass on to your students. So, Chris, we can open it up to questions or other people's examples, or I'm open to anything right now.
Awesome, thanks, Paul. Just before we do open up to questions, I am going to